Gabrielle Clark, thank you so much for being willing to have a conversation with me. This is, I know we've met personally, we spent some time together, and the action that we met when we did really was in Anaheim in the fall of 2022. And I think we learned a lot about each other. And I've just been watching you growing and growing and gaining all this stuff and attention and people understanding what you really have to offer. So thank you for being willing to talk to me about it. And I think it's perfect for the connection with the affirmation generation. I had you do the endorsement, an endorsement for that and everything. But I would love for the audience that has never met you and those that think that they know you to get to know a lot more about you. And I think it's really important what you're doing. So again, thank you for having this conversation with me.
Thank you so much for having me, Joy. I always want to take every opportunity that I can to help people who are fighting indoctrination. And in this instance, fighting against gender ideology. I think that we all need to do everything we can do to support one another in fighting this. And I think you're doing a wonderful job. I was very, very honored to be able to view the film before it's released and offer that endorsement, because I think it is important that people see exactly how this starts and where it goes. And that leads to how I got involved with this fight. I was just a regular mom. And like so many mothers across America throughout the lockdowns, my children were in distance learning. And while they were in distance learning, I saw some things on my daughter's computer screen that I thought that was inappropriate for children, and contacted the school, and I didn't like what they had to tell me about it. So I started paying closer attention and ultimately decided to remove my daughter from that school and place her in another school. And my son was also going to that school as well. And when I talked with my son about some of the things that were going on in his class, I didn't like what I saw. And so we decided to take action. And my son was being asked to list his identities and attach signifiers to those identities of privileged or oppressed. And, his race, religion, sexual orientation, gender ideology, those sorts of things. And we felt that that was inappropriate for school. So we filed a lawsuit. The case has since been resolved. But in the course of filing a lawsuit for my son, my daughter was being socially transitioned and into believing that she was a boy. And that was a whole other area of indoctrination that I had some familiarity with, but not enough. And when that happened, I really became more in tune to what was happening broadly in the country and even around the world. And watching my daughter go through that made me really decide, okay, I have to step back from this and save my daughter. And so I created a program to help my daughter successfully desist. And now she is fully embodied in her femininity, and she understands reality now. And now I help other parents. With their children. And I created a coaching service where I provide people with the ability to parent their own children into desistance.
So this thing that happened with your son, you're dealing with CRT, right? Critical race theory. How old was he when this happened, and what year are we talking?
He was a senior in high school. This is in 2020. Yeah.
And how's he doing? How's he doing now that that you went through all that?
He's still a young man, so he's still trying to figure it out. But there were long-term effects of indoctrination for everyone, and he's still working through some of those things. And nobody is going to escape this unscathed. So, and this is why I think fighting indoctrination as a parent, it's become my single most important thing in my life, because of what happened with both of my children, through CRT and through SEL.
You said SEL. Can you say what is that?
SEL is social and emotional learning. It's a program that is in the majority of schools in America. And they basically try to teach empathy and understanding so that children behave better in school. But unfortunately, it got co-opted like so many things in our society by gender ideology. And now we're looking at children being indoctrinated into gender ideology at school. So, you know, with that, I have been able to help other people find lawyers to fight CRT and SEL.
And this is because of all the work that you did in the first, can you talk about that lawsuit? What is it that you did and how did you approach that? And you're not a lawyer, right?
Right. No, I'm not a lawyer. No, I'm not a lawyer. My late husband was a lawyer. My son William's father, he was a lawyer. And I learned a lot from him. And I did learn, you know, about my rights and my, you know, our rights as Americans. And so when we realized that we had the ability to fight back, that's exactly what we did. We filed a lawsuit based on our First Amendment rights, Title VI and Title IX rights. Like I said, the case has been resolved, but it was a very difficult process, and it was you know, transformative for our entire family in understanding how society works and what you have to do in order to exercise your rights as Americans.
And our First Amendment right, you say
freedom of speech.
And then you mentioned two other
Title VI and Title IX. So there were multiple offenses that we sued based on. And Title VI and Title IX were both race and sexual discrimination. You know, when schools ask their students to tell their sexual orientation, or pronouns or any of that whole business, and a student doesn't want to do that, and they try to force them to do that, you know, that is that's a compelled speech situation, and you have recourse. There have been other parents who have been able to fight back based on compelled speech. Those are federal violations, and you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to do it to students, and you're not allowed to go against parents' wishes on certain things, even in school. So, you know, this is why I help parents find lawyers so that they can fight back.
So can you talk a little bit about that case? I mean, it's precedent setting, isn't it? What happened with you suing and winning a case?
Suing based on CRT was certainly a precedent setting case. And, you know, we were able to, William was allowed to graduate for that year. At the time, they wanted to prevent him from graduating because he didn't want to complete the class. And we thought that it was inappropriate for that class. So they decided that it was a requirement that he finish the class. And if he didn't finish the class, he was going to fail and thereby not be allowed to graduate. He would have been prevented from graduating. And we were, you know, we thought that was inappropriate. So we had to take legal action. And he was allowed to graduate that year. And we continued fighting for the damage that had been done.
So that class, when you say that class, what class was it exactly? Was this the
The class
social
was
and emotional learning class?
no, that class was called Sociology of Change, and it was a civics class.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to get at, was exactly what was the class? Because I mean, everything that I remember talking with you about, it was like so compelled and so against the law. I mean, I've known that from the basic civics, but there are people that watch this channel that are international, so they don't necessarily know what our laws are and what, our Title VI or Title IX is. But civics has become something that when I was growing up, I mean, we were forced to take a civics class. We were forced to learn what our rights were. By the time I was in sixth grade, I mean, by 12 years old, we knew a few things. And then by ninth grade, when you're in junior high, and for some people around the country, that becomes high school, you must take a basic civics class. That isn't anything that exists now, and it hasn't existed for years in California. I mean, they took that away like they took away physical education. These used to be basic things. So
They've replaced some of these things. Like, I mean, we also used to have to take a sex ed class.
yes.
That taught you about reproduction. But they have replaced these classes that we used to understand as educational and have turned them into an opportunity to raise activists. So action civics and transformative SEL, or even in some states, pleasure-based sexual education have become a
More
thing.
the norm.
Yeah, a thing where it wasn't before. And lots of parents are starting to really understand that even though some of this may have been well-intentioned in the beginning, its implementation and the co-opting of a narrative that we don't necessarily agree with, or a course of action that we don't necessarily agree with in our individual families, has become part of the curriculum and is embedded in the praxis. So we don't want our children indoctrinated. We want our children educated. And in order to do that, you don't have to turn children into activists, and you don't have to make them conform to your way of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me a little bit more about your own background? Like, where do you come from? How did you come to this mindset? You're a very independent woman, very forward thinking, and I know you're a critical thinker. I mean, that's why I think we got along, because it's something also, again, I don't see in the regular curriculum of public schools anyway, that debate teams or debate as a subject or as a topic anymore. It seems to be going by the wayside, which is very concerning to me, because it fosters critical thinking. And here you are with two, teenagers, young adults, and all that. What is your background that you think even led you to be a fighter in this way?
Well, for one thing, I'm a Texan. I think being born and raised in Texas, kind of, there's a fighting spirit with most Texans, I think. But my mother was a very hardcore feminist, so social issues were always very prominent in our home. But I think that any woman, if you mess with any woman's kids, they're going to turn into a fighter. And that can come from that's anywhere. Our primary job as mothers is to protect our offspring. And so, if you're going to do something that is going to harm my children, especially if I feel like it's going to harm them physically and permanently, then you gonna get the business from mama. So I think that is the primary thing that has made me be such a fighter in this particular situation. Seeing my son go through some of the things that he was going through, made me want to stand up and fight with him, alongside him. But watching the things happen to my daughter and her change and the way that it was affecting her physically and emotionally, mentally, all of those things, that turned me feral. I'm gonna get feral. You mess with my baby, because she's my only daughter. I have 5 children, and she's my only daughter. And to watch her go through this disembodiment and emotional turmoil that would ultimately lead to physical mutilation, that was a no-go for mama. And you're not going to mess with my kid.
So I understand that the lawsuit, though, that you did do, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it did set this precedent in a way that there are law firms around the country or something using this template of yours. Can you fill me in on that?
Yes. So across the country, they're even in law schools. The lawyers that have been involved in this speak and give lectures in law schools about this particular situation, because it's never been really done before in this way. The public interest firms that had helped us in this fight, because there were many that helped us, even public interest firms that didn't really have a direct hand in it, they wrote briefs for us as well in this case. So they're able to use this model to fight on, say, like a pronoun case. So if somebody is being compelled to use the wrong pronouns, or they're compelled to give their pronouns, then they use our case to fight against it. And our case has also been used in legislation, as examples in legislation in different parts of the country. So yeah, the landmark nature of this case has made it possible for other parents in other areas, and even teachers, to file their own lawsuits and have their own cases heard and have their own cases understood, so that they can get relief in their schools.
So I'd love to hear what it is when you have a parent. First of all, how do you connect with parents? I mean, everybody's connecting online and everything, but that's, specifically not what I'm asking. It's a whole thing of whether we meet people in real life or online. How are you connecting with parents? What do you feel like you're offering them that possibly, there's several organizations that say they know how to help parents and this and that. And you're talking about specifically helping parents connect to lawyers. It sounds like the legal process is a very important part of what you're educating people about. But how are you helping a parent? Say that I come to you and I say, my kid's getting indoctrinated, and I meet you in what? How am I going to meet you on? Because I find out about your website, or it's at word of mouth at this point. Are you doing, appearances, places? Can people hire you or whatever to show up and talk about this process?
All of the above. So however you come to me, if you say, like you said, if you feel like your child is being indoctrinated, most people do find me through social media, primarily through Twitter. And a lot of the times it's relatives or friends or family of a person who is struggling, and they say, hey, I know this woman and she can help you. And then they get in touch with me either through Twitter or a direct email. Some of them have come up to me in person. I do speak around the country, at any given time. And I mean, I hate to say that I'm a public speaker or a motivational speaker, because to me that sounds a little silly, but when someone wants me to come and speak to their group, then yes, I do everything I can to make it out to speak to their group in person, because I think that seeing and being able to ask someone questions and being able to speak to people, and some of these people, when they meet me for the first time, they are in tears because they were too afraid to fight before. And when they see me, or they are able to speak to me, it really does have, it has a visceral and emotional effect on them. And they're very they feel compelled to tell me about what happened to them, and tell me about how my inspiration helped them to fight back. And so yes, in all of the above, however you come to me, that's where we'll start. If a parent has an indoctrination situation going on at their school, they'll tell me what's going on, and we'll come up with a plan to take the appropriate measure. It doesn't always take a lawyer. You know, sometimes all it takes is a group of parents speaking out. There have been parents they'll hire me to come and speak to their group and teach them how to organize, because some of these people have never had to do that before. And you know, some parents will come to me and they don't want to do anything publicly. They just want to handle it in their own households. And so you know, I teach them how to pull their children out of this cult. And you can find that on my website, my coaching service for Affirming Reality. That's what we do. We affirm reality. And I teach people how to parent their children into reality. That seems like a weird concept, right? Because we're all living in reality. But the fact of the matter is that because of social media and the blanketed gender affirming care model, the authority figures in these children's lives, the social media that they're engaged in, and the peer pressure that they experience from their friends, it takes them out of reality. It takes them into a fantasy world that does not exist. And so sometimes the parents will come to me and they just do not know how to navigate this situation, because we have never had to do this before. And with a lot of it, it takes the parents hearing that they actually do know how to do this. They have to trust their instincts, and their instincts are telling them, get your child off of social media, homeschool your kids if you can. Make sure you understand the environment that their peers are creating around them. And if they have to move, or if they have to leave their friends behind, or if they have to leave their schools behind, or take that phone away, then that's what needs to be done, so that their children can understand what is real and what is about their real lives, what they are as human beings.
So it sounds like you have sort of this template of like a step-by-step sort of, you know, a blueprint, if you will. However, each family is, then you're looking at that organically, like how are they going to deal particularly. So say that I'm a mom that's come to you and talking about my 13-year-old, and I'm living in Las Vegas, and the schools I'm surrounded by, there's not really an option to move my child to another school, because I found out that they're doing the same thing there. And maybe the only way that I can deal is and I can't homeschool. So if I throw these obstacles at you, you're looking at each family and each situation. Again, if I say, I've already learned in my area that my child can't go to another public school, I can't afford a private school, I can't afford to homeschool because I'm working 2 jobs or whatever, and maybe my partner has left the situation and I was relying on some of that income. So it could be financially, it could be geographically. You're looking at sort of massaging those basic guidelines, though, it sounds like. Again, like you've got step 1 and 2. What would you say? Because I know in your own situation, you did end up leaving and, you know, moving towns or whatever. Can you talk about that a little bit, and the challenges of that you've faced, maybe working with other parents as well?
Yes, because there's no one size fits all, right? So every family is going to face different challenges, and this is what the coaching program is all about. There are phases and steps of helping your child to desist, but you do have to navigate how those phases and how those steps are going to be implemented. And sometimes that may mean having to move. But I mean, it does, sometimes that's not always possible. So every situation I have to look at, and we have to kind of go over the broad understanding of where the family is in their lives, and try to come up with a plan of how they're going to get to a place where they can implement these steps to help their children. And like I said, sometimes that means that mom or dad is going to have to quit their job so that they can stay home, or they're going to have to move, or they're going to have to homeschool. Sometimes the decisions, the decisions are radical. I did have to move. I had to move away from Las Vegas, and that may be something that a parent has to decide for themselves. And in my situation, there was no such thing as we can't afford it. We were homeless. We didn't have, we were homeless at the time. And I ended up squatting in one of my cousin's townhomes that was unfinished. We had plywood on the floor, and we lived there for nearly a year so that I could pull my daughter out of this cult. Sometimes the prescription is going to be radical, because this ideology is radical, and sometimes it's going to take a radical solution to get them out. I try to encourage all of my parents to do as much as they can without disrupting their children's lives, disrupting their children's lives so much. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. However, the majority of the parents that I have worked with were able to just make some changes in their everyday lives, and make some changes in their priorities, and pull their children out.
Mm-hmm. Can you give us what some of that basic stuff is? It's not so radical, and for some parents it would be very radical.
Right. So taking that phone out of your kid's hand, that is, for some parents, that was very difficult, because as parents, we always believe that having that connection to your children when they're not at home with you, when they're not standing there with you, is so vital, because you worry about the dangers out there. So you want your child to be able to have some sort of communication with you, right? But they don't have to have a phone with unfettered access to the internet. So for some parents, taking away the phone for them was just too much. They couldn't fathom the idea of not being able to communicate with their children. So I was able to offer them resources where they could get a phone that does not have wireless, internet capability. And so that way they could get their children out of the social media addiction, and get them off of social media, get them out of the idea that unfettered access to the internet is something that is a necessity in their lives. So that's one thing. Another thing was literally stopping doing. I had to convince parents to stop doing the activities of their own hobbies and start incorporating hobbies as a family. So literally going out and touching grass was how I did it with my daughter. So we did a lot of gardening. We did a lot of physical activities. She's a skateboarder, those kinds of things. With other families, I had one family that took their son on a 3-month-long camping trip. So they camped all around the country. That was very, very eye-opening for them, because they did not realize how much they themselves had become addicted to their devices. They did not realize what it had done to them. And then they also didn't realize how detrimental it had been to their son. So taking those trips, I had a parent that decided to leave the country for a month and go back to their home country. And that country is not as technologically advanced. And so, they were, and they are not very progressive. It wasn't a very progressive country either. So that wasn't part of their daily lives. You just, every family is going to have these things that they can implement in their daily lives that will change how their children see the world, and their children's worldview, and their children's perception of themselves as well.
So you work with parents like this, give them some of these basic tools. They're going to be maybe struggling with this, whatever. So your idea as a coach is that you're keeping them on track as new things might develop with their kids and everything. This reminds me so much of the Australian Maori woman, Michelle Irao, who wrote this article, Stay Human, and it was in Jennifer Billick's blog. It's such a basic thing. And when I was asking you about your own background, I wondered, had you been involved before all this stuff happened with your son at first with the CRT and then your daughter with gender ideology and all that? Is there anything in your own personal life as a teenager or even younger or as a young woman that you were involved in political activism, anything like that? What was your background? Because a lot of people say, I can't do that. I don't know anything about, activism.
Nothing. I mean, I hadn't done anything like that prior to the beginning of these social issues. I had always been a conservative, but I just voted down the line, right? I just voted conservative down the line. It had never meant anything to me. But I did, when I started to see that voting conservative down the line wasn't exactly helping me, then I started going, wait a minute, what? And I started looking more, and I think a lot of conservatives felt that way. And that made me start to get a little bit more politically active, and maybe politically aware at that time, and start looking more into what it is exactly that I was voting for. And then, but you don't have to be an activist in order to activate. Most people are not going to be activists until something happens in their own home that activates them. And when my children were being threatened, it activated me. I didn't even graduate from high school. I got a GED. I started that GED when I was pregnant with my third baby, and I went into labor during that class, and I ended up having to go back and finish it a year later because I had my baby a couple of days later. So I mean, I didn't have any kind of formal education. I did not have an upbringing of activism. I didn't have any of those things to look back on. All I knew was what I learned from my husband as he was a lawyer. And when he died, I knew that my children were my sole responsibility, and nobody else was going to protect them. And it was my duty to do so. And whatever I had to do in order to do that, that's what needed to get done.
Listening to you, it reminds me of a conversation I had with my friend Amy Ichikawa, from Women to Women recently, where she educated me about people that are incarcerated, the difference between men that are incarcerated and when women are incarcerated. And she said that incarcerated men file lawsuits all the time, all the time. And women who are incarcerated don't. And, I know that there's got to be encouragement, around that for women to do that, to be able to have that and exercise, again, our rights as American citizens, which a lot of those rights get taken away when anybody is incarcerated. But the idea that all of us, no matter what situation we're in, I mean, you can see the difference right there when she told me that about the men and the women. And it's like, this is what's in life so much. And I'm not a mother. I never birthed a child, but I have always been very concerned about, I know that children get groomed because I had seen that with running away from the perverts that were hanging around the schoolyard. We hear about stuff like that I had the freedom to run around, even at that time. And I know that now is quite a different time. And if I was raising a child, my goodness, I mean, my attitude would be, I know, surrounded about the kind of mama bear stuff like what you're talking about. So that's why I asked you about your background and stuff before, because I wondered if you as a child had faced any discrimination where you were, or your parents, or anything like that you saw people starting to maybe step up, or even as a young, I don't know if you've been a conservative, your whole life, but if there'd been any influences on a personal level, or things that you saw that made you feel like not just your kids. But I know that I've talked to you about the idea of lawsuits, and we agree that many things are going to change, that the society will be forced to change when a lot of these lawsuits are happening, like detransitioners now, and you're very aware of that. So yeah, I was just wondering if there was something else that was more feisty that informed you as even a child. Because I have some of that stuff myself, but I'd like to hear, were you the little girl that stood up for social justice in a way, or the other kids, that were maybe being bullied or anything like that?
I think there's always been that part of me. My friends and of my parents and my relatives, my older relatives, they always thought that I would be a good mother because of how protective I had been over the younger children. I'm the oldest child, and so being protective over my younger siblings had always been just part of what I did. But I'm half black and half white. My father is white and my mother is black. And growing up being biracial at that time it came with its own problems, and not from any one side either. It came with its own issues. So yes, I mean, everything we all do in our childhoods, in our young adult life, is going to influence how we turn out as adults.
Mm-hmm.
But watching some of what was going on in my mother's family, especially because we lived in a multi-generational household. My grandparents and my mom and her sisters, and then us kids, we all lived together, and we would discuss the current events. And even then, I probably was a little more conservative in my thinking as a child than the people in my family. But by and large, listening to the adults in my family talk about current events and politics, really did shape how I see society. And I do remember my mom, she was very big on social justice. And I remember when there was a man who got shot in a convenience store, and seeing her be so vocal about that, and even making comments about the situation. Every time we would go past there would be, past that convenience store in our neighborhood, there would be a bunch of people outside of it protesting, and my mom would honk her horn, yeah, and she would, and all of that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely that in my family. There's a lot of teachers in my family, and listening to the teachers talk about all of the things that they had to do and the things that they had to overcome as teachers. Listening to my grandmother talk about how she had to bug the admissions lady at the community college to let her in with only $2. She only had $2 to go to that college, and she wasn't going to be told no. So she went down there and bugged that lady until they just got tired of her and they let her in. For crying out loud, she's getting on my nerves. Yeah. So, but I mean, those are all, those are all going to play into anybody's life when they're trying to accomplish something like this. But I think that people need to draw on those things more. And this is also what I coach. Think back to when you were young. Think back to what it was like and start drawing on some of the things that made you feel connected, some of the things that made you motivated you to do whatever it is that you were doing, and try to work within in those instances to help your children, or to get the strength to fight back. Whatever it is, I do try to draw that out in people. I look for a motivation for them, and a lot of the times it is, thinking back to when they were young and what motivates them.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all this stuff. It's very enlightening. I know for a large part of the audience that would see this is going to be very helpful in terms of our battle that we've been in, yes, but is going to continue on for a while as we see these deep fakes and AI and all this stuff infiltrate our social media, and a lot of people still addicted. They still can't get away from that as adults. I'd say they're not providing great role models for the kids if that's something that's going on, but it's the whole society. We're soon going to not be able to tell the difference between the sexes, is my thought, because I know that, and particularly working on this film, that getting kids, and why they're doing this in California, I think particularly we are the experiment state for where they're getting kids so young. And we have senators and our governor trying to push the age of consent down. Right. Because when kids get puberty blockers at a really young age, it's a lot harder to tell when they become a teenager if that's a boy or if that's a girl. And with these hormones doing what they're doing that are irreversible after a period of time, and depending on what age the child is, we're looking at a combination of literally looking at another human being and not necessarily knowing right off, where we know that as mammals, we usually do, just like dogs and cats, know the difference between human men and women and, their own species and everything. That the combination of that and the handing out of puberty blockers and wrong sex hormones is altering our bodies. It's altering society, then it's altering what we see and what we think, and it's messing with our perceptions about what's safe and
Right.
where potential dangers are, right? And that's how we get into the whole child safeguarding issue. And,
right.
And I wondered if you had any thoughts about that, because I'm bringing up the combination of these deep fakes and AI, and you knowing well what's going on with the whole medical industrial complex at this point, trying to deliberately confuse us as humans about who we are, and removing sex from the equation. And
and I do talk about that with my parents. I tell them, listen, you're going to have to really make your boundaries solid, and make your children understand safeguarding, and also stop trying to convince yourself and your children that we have evolved out of our humanity, or that we have evolved out of being animals. We have instincts. We have something that AI will never have. There are aspects of our lives that we are going to have to acknowledge and stop trying to think ourselves out of, or imagine ourselves out of. And reality is just that. So yes, I tell my parents, make those boundaries clear. I wear pearls almost every single day. It's one of the things that I think it's one of those things that reminds me that no matter how feral I get in a protest, I'm still a woman. And it's one of those things that I use this in my talks. I tell people, whatever it is that grounds you into keeping that idea in your mind that I am still a human, I am still an animal, I am still a man, I am still a woman, no matter what society tells you, no matter how much they try to pound it into your head. This is the real thing. This is what's real, and this is how you stay real. Mm-hmm. And I think that those are the kinds of things that are making they're making a comeback, right? So having a connection to what is real is making a real comeback. Now more people are starting to say, you know what, maybe online dating is not the best thing. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's better to go out and meet people and shake their hands and look them in the eye. People are starting to make those connections that we as a species can no longer just live online. It is not healthy. And so we're going to reject the idea of puberty blockers turning us all into some sort of Ken doll down there, right? we're rejecting the idea that that we can just do away with women because we can, create our own little uteruses and start, cooking babies up in labs. That those kinds of ideas are really starting to hit home with people, and they're starting to see the existential crisis if we decide to make that the norm. Mm-hmm. So, and on a personal note, I've spoken with some of these women who took puberty blockers as children and are now they've become a fetish for sick people because now they're not anatomically correct in their body formation. Their bodies are not fully formed. Mm-hmm. And they don't resemble anything like a natural body anymore. And so now they're starting to speak out and talk about how, hey, look, even when you do this and you think it's going to look one way or you think you're going to feel one way, the reality is that you become something wholly different, and it's not natural, and you actually end up becoming a fetish, and that's not healthy either. Mm-hmm. So, the whole idea that they're trying to make us all have weird body parts so that we all look alike, that is just insanity, and we all need to address the insanity and stop it, because that's, as we know, not what happens. Mm-hmm. It's not normal, and it doesn't look natural either.
Plus the whole idea of one losing healthy sexual function throughout life.
That to me, honestly, I mean, and let me tell you something. There have been multiple times where I've ended up a puddle on the floor, crying my eyes out as I'm calling a lawyer to try to find a detransitioner who has never experienced intercourse at all, and because they thought that they were gay, and then they progressed into trans. We're taking all of this stuff, and they're never going to experience any kind of sexual gratification because now they're completely sterile, and they have no sexual function whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So I cannot even imagine what that life would be like. That to me, that would be like taking away my tongue so I couldn't taste anything anymore. Or taking away my eyes so I couldn't see anything anymore. Mm-hmm. It is a part of our lives that we rely on, not just for practical use, but also for the joy of living. Mm-hmm. The joys that we indulge in every day. Being able to see how beautiful the world is, or being able to taste the juiciness of a pear. I mean, you can't replace that, and you can't opt out of it and think that your life is going to be full.
Mm-hmm.
It's not.
Plus, with wrong sex hormones, we now know doing that over a length of time reduces. I learned this from Dr. Quinton Van Meter, who we were speaking about earlier off camera, that they now know that wrong sex hormones over a period of time cuts our lives in half.
Right.
That is a
poison.
huge
A poison.
Yes. Yeah, that is a
poison.
huge thing. A huge thing. Well, Gabrielle, this is great. I'll be putting all the links and stuff in the bottom of this. Happy Mother's Day. We're recording this on Saturday, the day before Mother's Day here on May 13th, and Mother's Day tomorrow. So I hope that you have a lovely time. And I really look forward to being able to meet with you again and us to have these other conversations on a larger scale about what we're all doing in this country, in America, and what's going on beyond, and how we influence each other and all that stuff. I mean, there's just so much to talk about. So I really appreciate. Is there any last kind of anything you'd like to say?
Affirm reality. Affirm reality. It's time we all start living in reality. Go out and enjoy your life. Enjoy the things that make you a human.
Stay human.
Yes.
Thanks so much, Gab.
Thanks so much for having me, Joy.
Okay.